The No Miki Show. We clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The No Miki Show.
Hello and welcome to the No Miki Show. It is Friday, January 14th. It is Femme Friday. Very exciting day. We have an amazing show today. We're going to be shaking things up today. We have Alex Press on. She's a staff writer at Jacobin. She is, of course, she specializes in labor. We're going to talk about the Starbucks organizing that's happening now. It's spread across the country, but it started off in my hometown of Western New York. Right down the block from where I used to, grow up. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. And then right after Alex, we have our friend, Scotty Nels Hughes on. She worked for Trump. You may recall her when they profiled her on SNL. She was like a character on SNL. We got to pull that clip up and show it to folks if you don't remember that from 2016. Scotty and I go back, way back. We love a good debate. And for a lot of the conservatives that I've debated, she's the most honest. She's willing to say when her side is wrong, just like we are willing to do that. So Scotty and I go way back. We're going to have a fun little catch up on everything that's happening in DC in terms of the insurrection. And then later on, we have a phenomenal panel with Akela Lacey and Lauren Ashcraft talking about how the Democrats are now challenging Joe Biden. Ooh, didn't see that coming, did you? All right. But first off, I want to have a talk with you guys. I know a lot of you have come to our show because of some of the work that I've done in the Democratic Party and reforming it and challenging it. Maybe some of you discovered the show from my work with Bernie Sanders in 2016 or at TYT afterwards, doing, movement or organizing on the ground or reporting. There's lots of ways people have come to the show. But I will say, I think that a lot of folks come here because they're not interested in inner party fighting. You're not interested in personality critiques. You're interested in getting stuff done and how to do it. And I was thinking a little bit yesterday about some of the lessons I've learned from my mentors. I have, throughout my career, sought out people who were around different generations, who were around when the Democratic Party used to win and cared about winning, and to learn about how the rules of the party were set, how movements work, when unions got basically cut away from the party, what's happening with the right wing right now. I seek out mentors, and I think everyone should in their fields. One of the lessons I was given a few years back during the Bernie campaign and a little bit afterwards when I was on the Unity Reform Commission was there was two pieces of advice. One was know the game and then win it. And the second was politics is energy. Whether it's energy on the ground, momentum building, energy being thrown against you, it is how you use that energy and how you move your opponent's energy. So these two lessons here, know the game and win it, and politics is energy, I want to talk to you today about. You can't know the game. You can't win if you don't, number one, know who your opponent is, know what you're fighting for, know how the game works, and then know how to move through the game with that energy. We're at a really critical moment right now. In history, I opened up the New York Times today and seeing the escalations, the military escalations that are occurring around the world with allies on the US's side pushing back against the authoritarian allies, whether it's folks like Orban and Putin and Modi all working together right now. There's conversation literally about Russia moving into Cuba right now. Like, what are we dealing with here? It's not the Cold War anymore. This isn't a fight over communism versus capitalism. This is about who's in charge and who's going to make the most money. Let's just be real. All of these world powers are owned by oligarchs. We got all our oligarchs, they've got their oligarchs. And I'm a little shocked that we're not having a more open conversation about this on the left, because they're thinking three-dimensionally about how to neutralize us while a military escalation might take place in Eastern Europe right now. And that doesn't bode well. And the negotiation terms right now, when Putin and Biden got together in a conversation, and Putin said, it seems like Biden's acting in good faith, which really shocked me. But the one thing on the table is eliminating NATO, which is essentially, the allies. Imperfect. Again, we can call out our own people and say they're imperfect and do a lot of things that I think we progressives would not agree with. With that being said, that conversation alone, I think, is worth discussing. Meaning, we are on the left so focused on the fights that we've been fighting for the last 5 years that I think sometimes we're not even paying attention to what's happening globally in a really intense way. Steve Bannon, as we've said on the show, has invested internationally, had a monastery in Italy recruiting far-right candidates to run in their localities as far-right and populist as possible. They beat the left in many situations. They lost some seats. They didn't win in the EU, but they won the movement and have built, movements in different countries, whether it's Italy or France, or we see with Orban right now, or Greece or other parts of Europe, Poland. Poland has declared that they are very scared right now. I'm thinking about this because I think it's important noting, something's going on in a way that hasn't happened in a long time. And I think we just have to digest it. I'm not saying you take a position on or become an expert in foreign policy, or don't criticize the US's role in foreign policy or their past or their record. I am just saying we have to digest it. Now, how does it get this come back to energy and the game? We have to understand the game, right? We have to understand the game that they're playing before we win our game. Labor is finally getting the attention it deserves. There are not necessarily more strikes than ever before, but they're definitely getting more coverage. And of course, that's going to inspire more and more folks to organize in their workplaces that, haven't been organized before. And this is good, especially in an election year. And it puts pressure on Democrats to be better and act in real solidarity. It's one thing to campaign on a lot of these issues. It's another thing to do something about them. And working people, in my mind, is progressive. Working people policies are progressive policies. We need to make that very clear. But simultaneously, there's a global approach. And I want to talk about energy because it's easy. If anybody's ever done martial arts, jiu-jitsu, sometimes our opponents can use our energy against us. And we get baited. People pick fights. When you're baited and you get into those fights, you're distracted away from the big picture stuff. I mentioned the global stuff because that is a big picture agenda item. There's a pandemic. There's the economy that's in free fall. People are about to be evicted. The eviction moratorium is ending in New York in particular. Wages are not going up. BBB is basically dead on arrival. We can't even get testing out to folks. These are big picture things. And so I ask, and I know a lot of you who watch the show aren't necessarily these folks, but we have to ask, what are our allies doing? What are the folks out there in the progressive space doing that maybe they're getting baited by attacks, inter-party fights? The left, there's this whole reputation that we eat each other alive. I don't buy into that. We eat each other alive when we're baited by our opponents to eat each other alive. Solidarity is a practice. It's an energy. And in these moments, we have to keep our eyes on what is most important. Who are our targets? Whether it's Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, or Joe Biden to pressure them in more aggressive ways, or Senator Schumer to pressure them in more aggressive ways. Those are the people who should be responding because it's in their own interest to stay in power. But energy is finite. So I'm going to ask you guys, how are you spending your energy? What are you thinking about? What are you tweeting about? What are you organizing about? Whose doors are you knocking on? What are you complaining about? We are all feeling feelings right now. Where are we channeling those feelings? Because feelings are energy. Our energy can be so productive, or it can be weaponized by our opponents. So know the game, play the game, use your energy wisely. That's the lesson today. An amazing show today. Alex Press is going to be on right after this break. Alex is going to tell us about the energy on the ground in Western New York with the Starbucks organizing, which is now spreading further and further out. Very exciting as a Buffalonian. I got to say, I'm really proud of my people. And I can't wait to hear more. We'll be right back after the short break. If you don't know this already, we are not millionaires and billionaires. We do not have major corporations funding us. And shocker, we're not going to appeal to the right wing and be anti-vaxxers so we get clickbait. No, that's not how we run our show. We run our show off of your support, specifically patrons. Patreon.com has been a lifesaver for us. Our patrons on Patreon really have kept this show going after the election wave, when everyone was riding it through the doldrums of last year. It makes a huge difference. And if you're not already part of our Patreon community, please join us at patreon.com/The Nomi Keys Show. We have all different levels available. We send you some swag if you join at a little higher of a level. And if you're not able to, or if you used to be a patron and you're going, it's a little tough right now, no worries. Message us. Send us a note at thenomikeyshow@gmail.com, or message us in Patreon and we will work something out. If you can give more and sponsor somebody else, that also makes a huge difference. But this is how we keep this community alive. We want to make sure that we have the best quality show for you. And this is how we do it. So thank you to all of our patrons who've been supporting us along the way. And if you're able to join us and join our family, we're going to have some fun stuff this year that we're sharing with our patrons. Welcome back to the Nomi Keys Show. Alex Press is joining us today. Alex is a staff writer at Jacobin. Her writing has appeared in the Washington Post, Vox, The Nation, and so many other places. She is definitely focused on labor. And recently, she wrote a piece called Baristas of the World Unite in Jacobin. Alex, nice to see you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. How are you doing?
I'm as great as one can be in these moments.
Right. Sure.
So I'm really excited to see the momentum around baristas. As I'm sure many do, I have dear friends who are baristas who I was talking to one the other day, and she was telling me how she sees her work as a craft, as an art. And Jane McAlevey is an amazing writer and organizer, and she always talks about the dignity of work. And when I heard her say that she is so passionate about the work she does, and it brings it there's love of the art, and she is involved in all these competitions, I thought, this is dignity. This is dignity in work, and this is always what it comes down to. Starbucks, of course, in Western New York has they've organized and been very successful in their work and being recognized for their work, and it's definitely the movement is spreading. But before we get to like the actual mechanics of the movement, you've been covering this. Like, why is it baristas? I mean, obviously there's organizing happening everywhere, but Starbucks has been a big promoter of having healthcare and education provided. I wouldn't have necessarily thought that the conditions were ripe at Starbucks before maybe other places. What is it about Starbucks that clicked this time around?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, these are very hard to organize places, right? Small stores with high turnover. This is what part of why the service sector is so hard to unionize, right? People are coming and going so quickly. I mean, Starbucks, there's a couple things at play. One is that for people who want to build the labor movement, Starbucks is a massive employer, right? I mean, we're talking about, I think, 9,000 stores, maybe 230,000 employees nationwide. So once you get a foot in the door, there's a lot of potential if you really can organize across all Starbucks, which is what we're starting to see, which is amazing. I think there's some truth to the fact that the type of people that work at Starbucks might be inclined to unionize. People, there's the stereotype of like the millennial with a college degree who's now working at Starbucks. And that is some of the people who work there. I mean, there are conservatives, there are older people, there are people without a high school degree. There's a range of people at Starbucks, but it is the case that those people were a part of some of these early campaigns. There was the story in the New York Times today about this, that some of the sort of core organizers in Buffalo were former Bernie Sanders campaign volunteers, right? And so the Sanders effect is in sway. I read about labor day in and day out, and I see it in all kinds of workplaces, to be clear, including like industrial or blue collar workplaces, that people heard Sanders's message that everyone needs a union and that the working class can gain more power through unionizing, and they took it and ran with it. So we're seeing that too. Beyond that, I think that, if you have friends who are baristas, certainly I used to be a barista, and Starbucks had the reputation, despite sort of better health benefits than other sort of independent coffee shops, of being kind of a miserable place to work. I mean, people would always talk about like their Starbucks, trauma or their sort of training from Starbucks, where everything is down to the wire. People are ordering insane things and you have a huge line. And so it is a difficult job. And so that might be part of it too, is that this is sort of the standard bearer of this sector of the coffee economy. And the people who've been there, had enough. And so I couldn't tell you the specifics of why that store in Buffalo was the first to organize, but I can tell you now that, in the past few weeks since they won their NLRB election, other stores have won. Another store in Buffalo has since been declared union by the NLRB. And they've now filed elections at, I think, maybe across 8 states for other stores. So 3 more Buffalo stores will start a new union election at the end of this month. And there's just so many other states where this is happening too.
So I grew up in Buffalo. So watching this is really that store that's on screen right now. I used to study there in high school and take my breaks and sometimes skip classes and go there. And it's really powerful. But I want to add one more thing about that location, which, based on what you just said about education, this area where those initial Starbucks were organized is in this education like sector. There are like multiple universities and colleges in that area. And it might be a factor. I mean, we don't have any data to suggest this necessarily, but there are multiple universities and colleges in that area. And it'd be an interesting aspect to look at. I would be fascinated to see whether it's UB or Canisius College or, many other little colleges in that area.
It's funny you mentioned that you went there in high school, because that story I wrote that you quoted at the beginning, the Baristas of the World Unite, was about actually a different chain, not a Starbucks chain, about Coffee Tree Roasters, which is a chain in Pittsburgh. That's where I grew up. And actually, so one of those stores was where I spent much of my high school years. And actually, I worked at the restaurant next door. So I really spent a lot of time at that coffee shop. And this is the knock-on effect, right? These workers already were reaching out to the UFCW, which is the union they're organizing with. Right. They were doing that over the summer. So it's not like they were waiting. And now that these Starbucks stores have won elections, they reached out. This is a process happening across all sorts of coffee shops. But they formally have, are trying to get a union election. The company has, immediately fired someone in response to that. So they are trying to bust the union. And, it's more complicated at a smaller chain, right? This is not a conglomerate like Starbucks. It has like 5 stores, right, in Pittsburgh. Right. So it's not a mega chain. And that said, though, these workers have the same complaints that you see when you read what the Starbucks workers are saying. They're saying that they don't have enough pay. They just want transparency. They want to know why some people make more money than other people. And they feel like COVID kind of intensified their problems, that they felt at times unsafe, or like they weren't having the amount of communication and precautions that they would expect from their employer. And so it pushed them to the edge. So I think the pandemic also is a big part for workers across sectors, but especially in the service sector. People have sort of been pushed to their limits here.
Yeah. So before we get to Coffee Tree, because there are some differences, let's just touch on some of the circumstances that led to the unionization of Starbucks. Obviously, it's a much bigger chain, as you mentioned, but what were the conditions that they were complaining about, and how did Starbucks, just to remind folks, respond to the organizing happening? I mean, I think we all watched Howard Schultz tweet about it, comment about it, but again, like going back to Starbucks, kind of had this reputation of being like a different, socially responsible, big multinational company, who provided insurance and education for those who sought it, but it wasn't enough. So what were they demanding? And I mean, I was really surprised to see the way that they cracked down, given their like reputation of being more socially responsible, as a company.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was the standard complaints that you hear across the service sector right now, which is like understaffing for one, concerns about COVID precautions not being enforced or communication around COVID cases in the stores. And pay is always a problem in low wage service work, like being a barista. So those were the complaints, really. And there was also an ideological level of, we think that we deserve a union, just like any other worker. And so, we're just going to be the change we want to see in the world and start it here. I think you can't discount the fact that people are just saying, you know what, actually, I can do this myself now. As far as what Starbucks' response was, I mean, it was egregious. They spent an immense amount of money on anti-union campaigning, right? So, it at times was very funny. Like Starbucks rerouted its CEO of North America, which again is a position where this person makes an immense amount of money, oversees thousands of stores. None of these workers have ever met this person before, of course. They're not hanging out normally at a Starbucks. But they rerouted them to Buffalo and would have them sweeping the floors of the store, saying, I'm here for you. Look how much we literally, one of the top the top executives for Starbucks, the workers would be like, this is clearly surveillance or a threat. Like, of course, I'm not going to tell this person my complaints. Like, this person has immense power over me. But they would snap photos of them like sweeping and cleaning up. And so that is, a sort of
undercover boss.
Exactly. Exactly. These people are like, okay, just because we complained about understaffing, the idea that you're now bringing in like this multimillionaire to sweep our floors is not convincing me that like you're fixing the problem. And Starbucks really, it cracked down. It was spending a huge amount of money holding mandatory meetings, which is a part of the standard anti-union playbook for any company, where you're compelling workers to come in and hear, quote unquote, both sides, but really the case against unionizing from management often being trained by anti-union consultants behind the scenes on how to talk about this. And then that culminated, as you mentioned, with the workers in Buffalo were told, you should really attend this meeting. We're having a celebrity guest. And so the employer, like Starbucks would not say who it was. Turns out it was Howard Schultz, who had been flown to Buffalo to give a last right before the ballots went out to sort of make his case. And he truly messed up making that case. Yeah. So the sort of thing that people might have seen was that he went into a very long rant about Holocaust conditions, how people on trains being sent to death camps would share blankets. And isn't that a great sort of vision of humanity? And that's what Starbucks is like, is sort of how he concluded that story, which just left some of the workers in the room like, jaws on the floor. Who are we in this scenario? Are we being sent to a concentration camp? How do you understand this? And I mean, part of this is that an employer like Howard Schultz, employers in general don't want unions. They want more control. They don't want to cede any of that control. It's not just about cost. It's not like the union's necessarily going to get better wages, but it's really about the idea that someone else is allowed to have a seat at the table. And for someone like Howard Schultz, who is, he's a founder, the sort of Uber founder, right? This guy whose whole sort of sense of self is tied up with this company, and it's a sort of a mythologized company in the United States. Howard Schultz ran a presidential campaign in part based on, the way his values are embodied in this iconic company. And so to hand over that even to one store to sort of admit that you don't have the right to sort of unilaterally determine how your company is run is something that these people can't countenance. And they know that a foot in the door that door can be blasted wide open very quickly, as has been happening in the weeks since. And so that's why these employers spend so much money trying to defeat campaigns that are actually very small, right? I mean, it's not like a couple stores that are union are going to cost much money at all. It's really an ideological and sort of like an existential threat for people who run companies like Starbucks.
Wow. All right, so let's move to Pittsburgh and talk about what's happening right now with the unionizing effort with Coffee Tree Roasters and UFCW. Before we just so this is a smaller coffee shop, as you said, it's a regional coffee shop. But before we even get to that, like, sometimes folks organize independently their own kind of union drives. Sometimes they partner up with the union. How do they decide who to work with and why they work with that union?
Yeah, that's a great question. So generally, when you're starting to unionize, you don't reach out to anyone, or you shouldn't at first, right? You're talking to your coworkers, you're meeting after work at the pizza place or at the bar, you're sharing salary or wage information. You're like, okay, you know what? Actually, we do need to do something. These problems have gotten too bad. The boss won't fix them. At that point, there is a conversation that, generally is had about like, well, are there unions that operate in similar stores, right? Is there an obvious choice? And so with, the Starbucks workers, they're working with Starbucks Workers United is sort of affiliated with SEIU, which has a long history of organizing fast food and sort of low wage service work. I can tell you in my own experience of organizing a union, we reached out to one union, and, I thought it made sense to work with them. They were sort of the most proactive in response to me emailing them, reaching out, sort of asking questions. And they represented a few other workers in the same sector that I was in. But very quickly, we found we had problems with their approach, right? They were a little more top down than my coworkers wanted. And so we did something that's, a bit unusual, which is we then reached out to a different union. We said, actually, we've heard that you have the same sort of approach to organizing as we all have. And we met with them and we did, switch. So it's a process like anything else. Sometimes a union is going to already be like right now with the Starbucks Workers United, it becomes an obvious choice that like, oh, this is the union that all of the people across the country are working with. Obviously, they're the best equipped to sort of provide us the support we need. But in other cases, there's not an obvious choice. And it's really just a matter of weighing your options.
Coffee Tree Roasters, where are they in the process? What's the latest? Because it's how large? This is like how many stores again?
It's 5 stores.
5, that's it.
5 stores across Pittsburgh. So with them, they sort of went public with this campaign right around the holidays, December 22nd. They put out a video set with people from each of the stores saying why they wanted a union. The next day, one of those people in the video was fired, which had the effect, of course, of galvanizing the sort of labor world in the Pittsburgh region, which, despite being quite decimated compared to, say, steel era, is nonetheless, there's a pretty strong sentiment in Western Pennsylvania about being pro-union. And now there's a wave of politicians who are either running for office or who have been elected on a pro-labor platform. So that it's very easy for them to sort of be told, okay, you know what, actually, you need to put a statement in support of these workers. So that's where we're at, is that there hasn't been an election yet. The employer, this woman, Jean, who owns the 5 stores, is running an anti-union campaign. I don't think that worker has been reinstated yet, which is one of the demands. But, interestingly, I mean, again, it's about worker power. These workers have to be able to win this on their own and have to be able to withstand and fight. But at the same time, the local political geography now is favorable for this sort of thing. So the new mayor of Pittsburgh, Ed Gainey, ran with labor support and as a pro-labor guy. And in a number of ways, he's already sort of stood up for workers against one of the biggest employers in Pittsburgh, UPMC. Their workers are also engaged in a union fight. And Ed Gainey similarly has supported even these workers at a smaller workplace. And so I think this stuff, even though it's, we're talking about fewer than 100 workers, it's significant because this is where a lot of people work. Everyone has a small chain or an independent coffee shop at their whatever city or town they live in. And so you might have to think about, what does this campaign look like? There have been similar campaigns in Chicago with other sort of small coffee chains. And those have been a mixed success. They want a union, but the company is refusing to bargain. which is a good reminder that, of course, winning a union is just your first step. You have to get a contract. And, you know, I think I wanted to bring us back to Starbucks. I think the one thing people should know is that as these campaigns succeed, and it does look like there will be even more stores that are union at Starbucks in the coming year, the question is what happens, right? So part of the importance was in spreading this campaign was that if it was just 1 or 2 stores in Buffalo, Starbucks would have no problem closing those stores.
Right.
That is legal, and it happens, in fact, all the time. That if a small shop or one-off location gets too agitated, if the workers are demanding too much, employers all the time they can shutter those doors and move on. But the fact that this is spreading like wildfire means that Starbucks, you know, is in a place where it can't really do that anymore, right? Closing down the one store in Buffalo, they know would only inspire way more people to start organizing elsewhere and would be met with immense criticism, right, in the media and among their own workers. And so this sort of protects everyone when you organize at a larger scale than just 1 or 2 shops. Anyway, just to answer the question, though, the Coffee Tree Roasters workers are organizing with the UFCW Local 1776, which has, you know, thousands of something like 35,000 members in Pennsylvania, New York, West Virginia, a variety of workers, including in the food sector. So this sort of was their choice that they thought made sense. And so far, I mean, the union has seemed to be very supportive and sort of fighting for this worker who was fired. So it seems like they made the right choice, but that's how it goes, right?
And these small campaigns, like, it's not just that they might have a ripple effect. They can shift the way that even the companies respond to these organizing efforts. I mean, if it's been exposed that Howard Schultz is completely out of touch, like, that's probably not going to happen again, which means they're going to have more difficulty, of course.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And I think it's something people should be aware of, that, like, if Starbucks was deploying millions of dollars to fight a campaign in 1 to 3 stores,
right, now
that there are over a dozen of these campaigns, you know, it's not possible that they're going to be able to wage that level of an anti-union campaign. So it in fact kind of gets easier.
With that being said, what are some of the tactics that they use when they do anti-union, you know, union busting strategies? I mean, there's law firms involved, or consultants, anti-insurgency types of folks. Like, what's happening here?
Yeah. So the one thing I mentioned are these mandatory meetings that happen on the clock. So a worker is sort of compelled to sit and listen to their manager or a different manager give the other perspective, right? And it's always framed as, we're just giving you the facts. We feel like you probably have been misled by the union. You know, the key is to always say the union is some other entity. It's not you and your coworkers. So we're just going to lay out the dangers of unionizing here. And so you have to listen to that often for hours a week. I write a lot about Amazon, and Amazon is one of the most intense as far as this goes. You know, during the Bessemer, the first union election there last year, it was like every week, hours a day, these workers are compelled to come in and listen. And in fact, they felt they were being surveilled while doing so. They felt they couldn't speak up sometimes because they would be marked as an agitator or a supporter. And so they felt like they were really being actually silenced and sort of put in a really difficult position. You know, there's also just general favoritism, right? Like a manager noting who is against the union, who's for it, and sort of then retaliating in soft ways, right? Ways that they can't be charged with violating the law over, but nonetheless making the union supporters' lives worse. It's also worth noting that while it's illegal to fire or retaliate against someone for supporting a union or being involved in organizing, in about 41% of union elections that run through the NLRB, the employer is charged with doing that, right?
Wow.
So this is what happened in Coffee Tree, that worker who was fired. Everyone is very clear that this was retaliation, right? So that is illegal, but employers do it all the time. So it's a mix of things. I mean, there's also just the message that is sent to people is that, you know, this location might close if you do this. Your life might get a lot worse. You know, there are all these things that the union's not telling you that you don't know about. So it's just sort of a climate of fear and confusion, and also just downright exhaustion, right? If you just want to do your job and now you're feeling like you're pulled into a political struggle, hours of your time are being spent listening to these conversations, you know, you're exhausted.
Yeah.
And the employer's trick is to say, remember that exhaustion, feel it, and remember that it's because of the union campaign that you're feeling that.
Oh, yeah,
so
that's
to
it.
link it to the idea that you're causing this yourselves, and it could all go away if you would just vote against the union.
That sounds like an abusive relationship.
Right.
Okay, so my final question before we wrap is there are laws. Of course, like they're violating laws in terms of in firing folks who are unionizing, but what happens when they break them? I mean, what's enforceable? Is there any sort of real oversight? Obviously, the PRO Act is somewhere right now. What does it do to hold these companies accountable for their actions?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely part of the problem, and of course, the case for something like the PRO Act, which right now there's very few consequences when an employer is caught in the act of breaking the law. When the NLRB finds them to have broken the law, so if an employer fires someone illegally, like is what happening at Coffee Tree, right? So this worker, Liam Tinker, is who was fired.
Right.
Say it looks very clear cut. It does look like they overstepped, and you could win this case that this was an illegal termination. What Coffee Tree will be compelled to do is rehire that worker and pay lost wages. But the problem even with that is that if the worker in the meantime got a different job, which of course they probably will because they have to have an income, any money they earned is deducted from that lost wage. So it's really about, if Liam was unemployed for 3 days and then found another job at a different coffee shop, Coffee Tree is going to have to pay 3 days of wages. That's it. So it's an incredibly perverse incentive. It punishes the worker for finding another job, and takes the already small sort of consequence for the employer and just makes it so much smaller, right? And so the PRO Act, adds fines, right? So that's sort of one of the big cases for it. Of course, the sense of it passing, I'm not going to pretend I think it's going to pass anytime soon. But it adds, $50,000 fines every time you're found to have violated the law. So even for a big employer, this looks bad. Even in Amazon that could afford a few $50,000 fines, it puts a concrete sort of number on their illegal activity. And certainly for a small employer like Coffee Tree, that would be a huge disincentive, right? They can't take a $50,000 hit. So this would have a real effect. But right now, employers pretty much just have to rehire the worker, or otherwise, if they violated the law in other ways, they're compelled, as Amazon has recently been compelled, to just put up signs at all the shops that say, we're not going to break the law. We're not going to threaten you. We're not, just a sign on the break room wall, something that, no one reads anyway, and cost them nothing. So it's just an admission of guilt in a certain way, not explicitly, but just a statement of, we see and hear you, and we promise we won't keep doing this illegal activity. So it's nothing. It's a joke. And employers do it all the time because they know they can afford this sort of consequence.
The more you know.
I'm sorry to say it. I wish there was a better answer. But I mean, really, the power that comes here, the only power right now is that other workers at that workplace get so outraged by this that they actually then escalate their campaign, right? So the idea of firing one worker at a very mobilized and organized workplace, the real consequence could be that your workers are then going to walk off the job, right? And they're going to escalate their actions. So that is a separate non-institutional response that actually can strike the fear into a lot of employers and stop them if their workers are that organized.
And of course, understanding their methods. So, the more people organize, the more they're working with unions, you're aware of their strategies to union bust too. So,
right. I mean, this is really the tragic thing is I really would encourage, in the labor movement, we call it inoculation, which is you're talking to your coworkers and you're preparing to go public or otherwise get organized, and you inoculate them against the exact anti-union lines that the employer is going to say to them so that they're prepared in advance and it's not effective. And this is a real tragedy that at every workplace, it's the exact same, 5 lines. But because the workers, if they haven't heard it before, they think some of them are convinced by it. But it's the same playbook, and it's the same people writing that playbook and exporting it across the country. And that is very unfortunate that it works. But truly, this is a script that your boss is reading from.
It's just a script. Alex Press, so interesting. I love having you on. These are fascinating conversations, and hopefully we just keep having them because this is what'll help us get out of this as Washington is stalled. So thank you so much for joining and for giving us an update on the coffee movement,
Sure.
the barista movement.
Yeah, happy to be on.
Thank you so much.
All right, have a good one, Nomiki.
You too. All right, we will be right back with Scotty Nels Hughes. We're going to talk about the insurrection. What's going on? Are people going to be held accountable? What's going on with the Republican Party? We're going to get into the brains of the Republicans because we need to understand them. And Scotty, she's a great advocate for that. All right, we'll be right back. On January 29th, I am so thrilled to be part of a training program for working women thinking about running for office now, or already in office, including their staff, those who are organizing on their campaigns and in the early stages, or if you're fully in. Matriarch is putting on a training. They've never done this before. It's focused specifically on class-related issues, structural issues that progressive working class women face when they run for office. There are a lot of lessons that we have learned in the last few years, taking on the establishment, organizing. It is hard work running for office. You have to usually give up part of your life. It can be tolling. It can be stressful, but it also can make a huge difference. And we are going to be giving you guys the tips, the tools to be viable, to run successful campaigns. And it's all going to happen during this training. It's on January 29th. Oh, did I mention it's free? You can sign up right now. Go to matriarchtraining.com. Go sign up. Share with others. If you know someone who'd be an amazing candidate this cycle or next, definitely go share it with them. The training is on January 29th. It's a full day's training, and we have an amazing lineup of speakers who are going to teach you everything from how to craft your narrative, how to raise money when you're not wealthy, because you still got to raise a little bit of money, who to hire, when to hire them, how to build a winning field strategy, and so much more. Check out matriarchtraining.com and sign up for this training on January 29th. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. I am so excited. Our dear friend Scotty Nels Hughes is joining us today. Scotty is a news anchor, political commentator. She was a commentator at CNN during the 2016 election, was an official surrogate. Were you actually on staff, Scotty, for Trump? I can't remember.
Non-paid. I was the first surrogate that was not, but I refused to be paid by the campaign.
That's so funny. I was the first surrogate for Bernie. What a weird coincidence.
That's why we
used to go head to head.
Nomiki, we're going on almost a decade this year of friendship, which shows that if people on opposite of the aisles can have as much fun, as much good conversations that we have, why can't the rest of the world?
Well, I think that the good thing about you is you have your own personal values, and you could separate that from the insanity that gets swept up. So
right.
I know it's been a bit, so maybe you'll feel more comfortable. But I do want to kind of start with one little aspect of your career, because I think it's probably how our audience might know about you. But I also feel like there's more to you, and CNN and many other sites didn't necessarily. I don't know what's the right. They didn't really get Trump in the beginning, and now it's taken a whole other life of its own, which we'll get to in the second part of this interview. But you were portrayed on SNL, and this was. I remember watching SNL that night, and obviously I'm progressive, so sometimes I really liked what they had to say, unless they were going after Bernie, and then I'd be like, oh God. But Cecily Strong portrayed you on SNL, and David, do we have that clip? Can we play it? Because I do want to get your response, because you're like, am I over? Why can't I be over this? But we got to do it. Listen.
We know that Scotty Nels Hughes is a very strong defender, supporter of Donald Trump. And you know who else knows? The folks at Saturday Night Live. Take a look at what aired last night.
You can't break me, Kate, because I'm crazy, and crazy don't break. And Kate, I know that you agree with me on 3 things when it comes to Trump. 1, he is drop-dead gorgeous. No. 2, he is bringing trade back so we can make American grapes again. And 3, he is way better than Ted Cruz.
Okay, yes, that I do agree on.
Okay, it was a quick little, they had a lot of fun in 2016, but you were on all the time, 24/7 on CNN. Sometimes we go head to head, but you, I mean, because Trump obviously won the nomination, you had a lot of opportunity and triggered a lot of folks. But I do want to say, like, you are different than the rest, and that's not just because we're friends. It's just because I know you. I know that you live in Tennessee. You're a populist. They made you out to be really ditzy. I did not agree with that at all. I thought that was cheap and minimized what was actually happening, which clearly took shape. So, I mean, how did you feel at the time when they did that?
Well, in all fairness, the Trump campaign and those that worked for the Trump campaign probably provided them a lot of material to work with. So it probably wasn't too hard for their writers to go in, especially if you were from the other side looking at what the campaign was doing at different points. But, obviously it was half an honor, half a, wait, I have that kind of roots and I wear those kind of cheesy necklaces. That's how they want to portray me. Just the outside image of it. But since then, I've obviously had a lot of issues with root. I had to go through PTSD of roots. In fact, I've probably bleached my hair so many times now trying to avoid it because of SNL. But the reality of it is that's what they're going to portray. And you've got to have some sort of humor. I can appreciate having humor in politics. I know, Miki, you've been around long enough. Yes, it's a very serious issue. And we are dealing with some very serious times, especially today. But we were definitely in 2016 as well. But I do appreciate the humor and people finding ways to laugh because everybody can relate to laughter. And as long as it is coming from a place of good, of a good-hearted, which a lot of those jokes were very good-hearted, then I can respect them. It's when people use them to be daggers. It's okay if they're kind of like softballs, but daggers, those are the ones that I think are dangerous because people then take those to heart and the demonization that goes to it. I might not agree with you, but I'm not going to demonize, Miki, because at least you care for it. That's what across the board is why we do get along so well, is we want people to be paying attention because we know that democracy really does die in darkness. And people are too busy and they want us to ignore what they're doing in Washington, D.C. on both sides of the aisle. So at this point, things like SNL and others comedy sketches that uses comedy to kind of keep people engaged in what is going on and paying attention, I can appreciate that.
So I'm glad you say this because things are much more serious. I mean, they were serious back then. And I think a lot of folks felt the pain and their energy was channeled into different directions. Much of this was populist because of income inequality and insecurity in the country. And of course, the establishment on both sides not really feeling the necessity of responding to working people. But that also led to folks like Steve Bannon preying on that energy and helping build the foundation for something which I believe is extremely dark. And, a little over a year ago today, from today, there was a rally outside of the Capitol. They were trying to stop this election from happening. And now today, the head of the Oath Keepers is going to be prosecuted for sedition.
January 6th now, a militia group had stashes of guns on the outskirts of D.C. ready to go on that fateful day during the insurrection. That's just one of the alarming allegations from the Justice Department today after the feds charged the leader and several members of the right-wing group, the Oath Keepers, with seditious conspiracy. That'll ring a bell. Here's the leader, Stuart Rhodes. He's a former Army paratrooper with a law degree from Yale. The FBI arrested him today. Federal investigators say the Oath Keepers had what they called quick reaction force teams stationed just outside the Capitol and the nation's capital on January 6th. Their job? To rapidly transport guns into the city as needed to stop the peaceful transfer of presidential power. The Oath Keepers also had teams on the ground at the Capitol who used a military-style stack formation to force their way into the building. You can see them here walking through the mob in formation, single file line, holding on to the militia member in front of them. The Department of Justice alleges they had paramilitary gear, knives, batons, camouflaged combat uniforms, tactical vests with plates, plus helmets and eye protection. In an interview with the New York Times over the summer, that very man, Rhodes, claimed he and some of the Oath Keepers had gone off their mission, and there were zero instructions from him or the group's leadership to enter the Capitol building. The government reports it has some evidence to the contrary.
And what the government says is that as early as 2 days after the election, he began messaging his team saying that they needed to prepare for violence to try to stop the vote count and prevent Joe Biden from formally being elected president, and that he repeated this and amped it up in the months that followed, eventually coming to Washington on January 6th, but not entering the Capitol. And another new thing here, Shep, is they say that after the January 6th siege of the Capitol, he continued to plan for violence, continued to message his supporters, and spent $17,500 himself buying weapons.
Which is like a real issue. And Kevin McCarthy, of course, has illustrated that he, in conversations with Donald Trump says he feels partially responsible.
I say he has responsibility. He told me personally that he does have some responsibility. I think a lot of people do. What I proposed, which I think history will say I'm right, because it's the right thing to do, I believe, have a bipartisan commission and get all your facts. Actually work through the grand jury to find out at the end, instead of predetermining whether someone's guilty or not.
I want to get your reaction to this really quick. Let's play this clip, the one of House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy on why he is not cooperating with the January 6th committee. Let's play this clip.
If you're subpoenaed, will you defy a subpoena? Will you defy a subpoena?
You have a unique window into the president on that day, January 6th. You were one of the only few people who spoke to him that day. Doesn't the American public have a right to know what the President of the United States was thinking and doing while the U.S. Capitol was under attack?
You know, that's a great question. You know the great thing about that? I didn't wait a year later. On January 6th, I spoke to the American public. Not by one network, but by many networks. My conversation was very short, advising the President of what was happening here. There is nothing that I can provide the January 6th committee for legislation of them moving forward. There is nothing in that realm. It is pure politics of what they're...
So, Scotty, I mean, where do you stand on all this? This has gotten out of control. You have Oath Keepers, you have Proud Boys running for office locally now, many of whom, by the way, whether Boogaloo Boys or Proud Boys, were arrested at the Capitol, are now trying to run for office. This is, can we at least both say that what happened on January 6th was bad and was, treason?
Well, I don't know about treason, but I will say 100% that I condemn it, as most conservatives, most Republicans have. Absolutely. What happened on January 6th did more damage, not only to our democracy, but also the Republican Party. But no, Miki, here's where I think there's some discrepancy and why we're having a hard time getting full answers as to what's happened on January 6th and the events leading up to it, and holding the proper people accountable, which I still do not feel like we have held or gone after the right people yet who were involved that caused that day to happen. Leading up to it, Nomiki, there was no way in hell I was going to be anywhere near DC. Most conservatives going into it that had a long history knew something was not right about that day. There were too many red flags. There were so many red flags, not only from the different people that were organizing it, but you could just tell the sort of emotions, the rhetoric that was being spoken. It was not one of peace. It was not one of, it was anger. And there was a lot of insightful language that just did not seem like the traditional, the same anger. People were angry back when Obamacare went through and you saw Glenn Beck have, million people here marching in Washington, D.C. We knew what that was like. You saw parts of that. And I do believe those first 48 hours, because there were 3 days of kind of rallies going here. And those were peaceful. They were full of prayer. There was those were fine. But it was that final straw. There was something about that final day, that final rally, that whole part that we still do not have full transparency on both sides. And I think if the January 6th committee was truly interested in not making this into be a political weapon to take out their targets, the GOP and Trump, from running again in 2024, if they really wanted to get to the truth of what happened that day, you would not see such a partisan committee with such the questions targeted that people aren't even really being the ones that are being publicly allowed to answer. You're not getting it. We're not finding out the
Scotty,
truth from both
is
sides.
partisan.
What happened that
This
day.
was a political event. This is not, I love, like, this was a purely political event that day in which they were trying to take down the president-elect from his election results being valid. That was political. I mean, the rallies minutes before Josh Hawley and President Trump himself, minutes before they stormed the Capitol, they were rallying and supporting.
They weren't telling them, but they weren't telling them
they
to
were
go and
saying
break doors and break windows. They weren't telling them that.
Well, that's what we need to know. Was it or was it not? Was it happening through who was in this chain of command? And this is what we need to understand.
We need to know. I agree. We do need to know that. What intelligence agencies were involved in it? We had just seen weeks before over in with Governor Whitmer that there was intelligence agencies involved in that kidnapping more than the people that were arrested. They were bad people, but it was amazing how right before the election that you had all of a sudden all these FBI agents that were infiltrating this group more than the actual group itself. So we need to know exactly where was intelligence on there. Why do we not know who actually left the bombs outside the RNC and the DNC? Who is that individual? Why do we only have 2 shots of them? There's so many questions that if we want to get to the truth of it, then let's get to the truth.
But they
let's not make this to be a partisan. But they're not.
Said, the
this
FBI,
is all about
that's
making sure that
that's not true. They're investigating. They're absolutely investigating. But
why
it is about
do they not have
2022.
an answer?
Kevin McCarthy. I mean, how long it took the Republicans to denounce what happened because they're so afraid of losing
took them minutes.
The kooky Trump base. Kevin McCarthy to this day is barely even
January
denouncing it.
He said it just then that he was within minutes outside saying this is wrong. Every Republican got on there and denounced the violence, much more than what we saw when the riots were happening around the country, much more than the riots in Portland that burned down cities and people were murdered at. And
there was no. There were no riots in Portland. People were living in their communities, trying to defend their communities.
Oh, that was a community.
Folks,
there was no race.
That's not a riot.
There's no violence.
Okay.
You've seen no politicians.
Rittenhouse was the only murderer. Let's just be very clear. The only murders that occurred. Let's be really clear here.
We're all scared. We're all scared of Rittenhouse.
Oh, how many murders has Antifa, an unofficial organization, Antifa? That's not true. Kyle Rittenhouse went there at a peaceful protest over a murder of a black man by police who they've now been prosecuted. And Kyle Rittenhouse went there as a vigilante who had traveled across borders to be a vigilante, who trained as a vigilante as a kid, brainwashed child vigilante. So, I mean, the reality here is there were murders at the Capitol, and the people who murdered and the people
the one that got murdered was one of the people who went in there. We never found out, and the person who murdered her was just let off. He was let off. The actual murderer. No, the Ashley Babbitt. Ever heard of her? She's the only one that was murdered there. The rest of them were not murdered at the Capitol. Let's be a little factual correct here, Nomiki. Like I said,
how so? I don't understand. A police officer.
Nobody was murdered there. He was not murdered there. The only murder of a police officer that's happened at the Capitol was a few weeks later by an Islamic terrist.
No, there was
extremists.
Oh my goodness! So you're saying that the people who died at the Capitol weren't murdered?
They weren't. There was only one death at the Capitol that day, Nomiki. The rest were heart attacks or suicides later on. But that day there was only one body bag that was carried out. It was Ashley Babbitt, and her murderer was let go and let free.
But it's
but
about
no
intent.
Questions there.
So my question is,
okay. So
there was intent. Plenty of people,
because she was there. She was allowed to be murdered. Nomiki.
There's no allowed to be murdered, Scotty. The intent of these
intent.
In writing, the intent going in, whether it was on blogs, in text messages, in Facebook posts, the intent was to lynch the vice president. Is an intent of murder. And those folks who are coming in, who you denounce yourself from being anywhere connected to them, as you should, those folks going in were angry, were brainwashed. Many of whom the FBI has interviewed now on camera say and admit, maybe as a legal defense or not, that they were brainwashed because they were on QAnon blogs. But we have to be real here. Much of the Republican Party is so afraid of losing this base of insane people, insanely brainwashed folks who have white supremacy in their veins, that they're unwilling to go after them hardcore. And they're saying, oh, this is all about politics. Of course it's about politics. The rise of fascism. What are you going to do? Not make it about politics? Everything's politics, Scotty. You don't think that in 2022, Senator Hawley doesn't want to keep his position? You don't think that the RNC is worried that this is going to make them look back and they're not going to be able to win a year in which they should be winning? Of course, Republicans are going to make it about politics.
No, Mickey, I don't think the RNC is worried about winning this year because obviously the current state, the things that Americans are having to deal with based off of this agenda of this presidency, that's why the Republicans are going to win. January 6th has nothing to do with why our grocery stores are empty and why our inflation's through the roof and why our men and women are preparing for war right now because this president wants to get us involved somewhere to make up for the money that he lost in Afghanistan. Come on, Mickey, there's bigger issues that we have.
What war are we getting ready for, Scotty?
Have you missed what's happening in Ukraine? Have you missed?
No one said we're sending troops into Ukraine. That's not even in conversation. Of course I'm following it.
Not? Go look at talk about not even the blogs. Go look at the headlines right now. Europe at the closest state of war. NATO preparing for war. Guess
that's not the U.S.
NATO.
U.S.
NATO's not the U.S. No, Mickey.
We're
kind of a big part of it. We're 45% of it.
We are members of NATO. Oh, really? So when NATO invaded Libya, there were no U.S. troops. That was French troops mainly. Let's be very clear. That's not how NATO operates. And I love how my favorite thing is when the right wing blankets everything like it's all the same.
But my favorite thing is that you have been a target of demonization, and the people that you represent have been demonized and falsely accused of all sorts of things. So for you to so quickly tarnish and try to paint all conservatives, all Trump supporters, I'm
not.
I'm a little
I
surprised.
said that you're different.
No, you did. Well, I know I am, but I'm talking about everybody that was there that day. A very small percentage of the
everybody who was there that day that stormed the Capitol, the thousands of people who stormed the Capitol. I'm not talking about the people who showed up at the rally. I am talking about
there was over a million. A very small percentage actually stormed the Capitol. They should be held accountable for the proper crimes that they've done, as well as the Capitol Police who opened the doors and let them in, as well as the ones that talked to them as they were being guided by the velvet ropes through statutory hall.
What about Lauren Boebert?
Hold all those people accountable.
What about the congressional members?
Hold them all accountable.
Including the congressional members who cheered them on and were communicating with them. Oh, they were communicating. There were text messages now released that there was communications between members of Congress.
Telling them to break the windows, telling them to break the law. I missed those communications.
He said, come on in. Come on in. That's illegal.
People's house. Well, what do you mean, come on in? Yeah, they opened the doors. Guess what? The police officers opened the door for them. Come on in.
You've been to the Capitol before, Scotty. You can't just open the door. A police officer, you have to go to security. Sometimes you have to get your background checked.
But the police officers did, though. Why, Nomiki? Why? Did you not see those pictures?
Why?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm very curious.
Why we need to find the answers on that. Why are they
in some of those cases, they did not open the doors, though. We did see the pictures. We watched it that day. And we saw Fox.
Should be held accountable. They should be held accountable.
Completely agree. Completely agree. Completely agree.
So hold them accountable, but let's not demonize the entire movement.
Trump himself has said to Kevin McCarthy that he feels partially responsible. Do you think that Donald Trump should be held responsible for his actions, his rhetoric, inciting violence? I think that there's an argument to be made that he did incite much of this. Not just
Listen, there was more violence underneath Barack Obama.
That's not true. What are you talking about? In a court of law, this would be thrown out. This argument's not relevant. Irrelevant. I don't know what you're saying. What about Donald Trump? Barack Obama never incited someone to storm the Capitol and denounce the fact that an election was won.
The American people, the rest of the land doesn't matter. See, if you're going to hold Trump accountable for the violence that supposedly he inspired on January 6th, there were 14 race riots that happened underneath President Obama. Should he be held responsible for all the violence and all of the destruction done?
Because you're talking about storming the Capitol and overthrowing the Capitol. You're talking about
at the same time, Obama commented on racial issues going on in the United States. If you're going to
was the Women's March a riot?
Because they commented. Yes, absolutely. Because there was actually the inauguration.
The Women's March was a riot. You're saying
after Trump's inauguration? Absolutely. Oh, you're talking about
I was there. I didn't see any riots.
It was just because they allowed, that was all the same group of people together. But those of us that were not a part of that movement, we weren't allowed to be there. No, the pro-life women could. No, I was there. The pro-life women, they couldn't be a part of that rally.
Yeah, because being pro-life is a tool of the Koch brothers. That's why. Let's just be very real.
No, I'm pro-life. I'm going to be at the March for Life this weekend or next week with my family and thousands of others. Very proud to represent the future daughters of this world that would like to be born.
Okay.
That does not make me a part of Koch brothers. In fact, I'm probably the least fan of the Koch brothers.
Who funds it? Follow the money.
The pro-life movement.
what murders
had
and
nothing to do with
riots
funny.
happened at the Women's March? Because going back to this, you know, we were talking about the insurrection of the Capitol, in which they literally tried to lynch the Vice President of the United States.
Hey, you know what?
And
I'm all for
you're
you
making that
keeping
equal
on
to
this,
the
though,
Women's
Miki.
March?
You can, yeah, I can.
How is
because
this
guess
equal
what?
to the Women's March? Like, women in 65-year-old women in pussy hats
I guess-
are
Yes,
doing the
it was
same.
all very okay. Okay, you're right.
Who murdered? I didn't. Was there violence at the Women's March? I didn't know about that. Largest march in the history of the planet. Like, that was violent. I didn't see anything. No headlines.
It was all
Scotty,
peace and love and
come
very
on, move
kindness.
to New
But no,
York.
Miki,
I know who you really are. I know who you really are. Get out of
I'm definitely not a
Tennessee.
New Yorker. I'm definitely not a New Yorker.
I've
I
hung
can
out with you
assure
in New
that
York.
one.
I know who you are. You know, I think that would be a great career. Like, former Trumper becomes a progressive. Like, you know how Kellyanne Conway and all these people.
I'm definitely not a progressive, but what I am for, the one thing we can agree on, to Miki, I think this is where we should probably end this conversation, is that one thing the progressives mostly, and I think conservatives can agree on, is that we don't need to get ourselves involved in foreign problems that don't have anything to do with us, that don't actually have anything to do with American security, that we don't need to get ourselves involved in foreign problems. And that is one thing we can agree on. I think that's something that we should focus on our relationship, because everything else,
in general, not being not an interventionalist is a great strategy, unless
American security is threatened. But according to you, we have enough of those threats here, so that should keep people occupied.
We do. We have a lot of those threats. Our Capitol was stormed a year ago, and now it's just politics.
Focusing on
that's
that
all.
Yeah.
Keep focusing on the fact that our government was almost demolished. I will do that. Okay.
Yeah, they were
definitely.
we were definitely in danger. Go ask Kazakhstan. Ask them what an insurrection looks like, Miki. Then you'll maybe get back to me and tell me what a real overthrow of a government looks like.
I think there's many forms of overthrowing a government. Take care. Be well. Thanks for joining. I appreciate always a good fight. She's out. She's out. Well, that was fun. All right, guys, we'll be right back with our amazing panel. We have Akila Lacey and Lauren Ashcroft right after this break. Hey, I want to talk to you about a product that I've been using for a little over a year now. I tried this. I heard everybody talking about it, and I was like, all right, doctor, I'm really into trying new things. So I went, got some Bodega CBD, and turns out it tasted like crap and didn't do anything, and I spent $100 on it. So that was a few years ago, and I was like, I'm not into this. I think it's a scam. And then Sam Cedar was like telling me how CBD had changed his life because he knows I have sleep issues. And he's like, no, I use it and it helps me sleep and stay asleep, because this is what happens when you get old and stressed out. It's just how it works. So I tried it, and turns out it changed my life. It not only helps me sleep, it calms me down. I toss and turn a lot at night. Last night, I was like tossing and turning like crazy. I got up, put some Sunset Lake CBD tincture into my water, drank it. Not only did it help me fall asleep with its melatonin, but it helped me stay asleep, and I wasn't tossing and turning with my aches and pains because I'm an old lady. Sunset Lake CBD is incredible because their product is really strong. What they did was they're up in Vermont. They ended up diversifying a Ben & Jerry's farm and decided to grow premium hemp. And with premium hemp, you get premium products. And I believe in good juju, because not only is the product wonderful, part of the reason why the product is wonderful is because the company is wonderful. Their minimum wage is $15 an hour. Their employees own the majority of the company, and they invest in advertising through companies like, and media companies like the David Pakman Show, the Majority Report, and of course, our show. They have all sorts of fun products. They're always coming out with new products. There are dog biscuits, which Bijou is a fan of. There are tinctures. There are tinctures with melatonin. There's lotions. There's coffee. All sorts of amazing products. You can go check it out at sunsetlakecbd.com. See what they have out right now. They have deals all the time, and we're giving you one right now. If you go to sunsetlakecbd.com and type in NOMI, N-O-M-I, you will get 20% off of your order. Go check it out. I'm telling you, it's amazing. My whole family's into it as well. you won't, and write me if you've tried it. Like, I want to know more. Share your testimonials with us. I'd love to share them with our audience. All right, we will be right back. Hello, welcome back to the Nomi Key Show. So excited. Our panel today for Femme Friday, we have the host of Biting Commentary, Lauren Ashcraft. She ran for New York's 12th Congressional District in 2020, and she is a board member for Women's March Alliance and a comedian as well. Just gotta add that. And Akela Lacey is here joining. She is a politics reporter at The Intercept, has a piece out, it was like a little over a week ago. But Akela, you wrote a piece with your colleagues about a West Virginia Democrat storming the Capitol on January 6th. And I just wanted to start off with that because how did you discover this?
Yeah, so not to burst the bubble, but the guys who did this video, Nick and his partner, they are the ones who found this person and did the whole video. I sort of came in at the very end to help write a piece to go with it, so I'm not going to take credit for it. But they are based in Morgantown, or one of them is based in Morgantown, and he works for Report for America and this project called 100 Days in Appalachia, and they have been based there. So that's sort of how they came across this story. And this guy had been a character sort of in the town for a while, so people knew about him. And then it came out that he had been at the Capitol and one of the people that was identified there. So yeah, they did all the work. I can't really speak too much to it, but it's a great story, and I definitely encourage people to watch the video. It's awesome.
Yeah. So it's interesting you say this, and Lauren, there have been a few stories in New York. You're based in New York, Lauren, as well. There was a guy I know who was like a Democratic Party activist in Brooklyn who stormed the Capitol. And I don't know if he's been apprehended. I don't know if he's just questioned or investigated. But I think this is what we're starting to see is, we just had a conversation, or whatever you want to call it, with Scotty Nels Hughes, who was notably part of Trump's campaign in 2016, but does denounce a lot of the Trump administration after leaving the campaign, and simultaneously what happened at the Capitol. But she was very quick to distract away and make it sound like it was this very small group of people, that there were millions of people who showed up and faith leaders, et cetera, who what were they showing up to do? They were denouncing the election. Like, that's why they were there on the Capitol. But she makes it sound like it's this small group, right? But like, we're realizing that it's not just that it was the most loyal Trump folks. The guy who was in the Democratic Party organizing meeting in Brooklyn was at the Capitol. This guy in West Virginia, was at the Capitol. I'm starting to feel like it's a lot more common than we think it is. Lauren, I see you're just go for it.
Yeah, I witnessed the tail end of that discussion, like you said, and it's just, sometimes I'm just curious to see how people try to justify what happened there. No matter how you explain it to me, I don't buy it. Like, saying that it was a small group of rowdy people, like, who wanted to murder Mike Pence?
Right?
Like
lynching Mike Pence, literally. They had a noose outside for him.
Right. And then equating it to the Women's March, which, by the way, I was involved in the New York one. Not a single murder attempt there. Not a single attempt of lynching somebody. I'm lost.
Is that our standard right now?
I guess that's the standard that this group of people wants to set. I guess I'm pretty fucking awesome then, because I have never attempted to murder anyone, and that makes me perfect.
Yes. Well, what really she started off by saying that the committee is just politicizing everything. And I'm like, yes, there was an event that tried to steal the election away from the president-elect, created and led by the leader of the party on the other side. Like, of course it's political, but they're using all of these excuses to distract away. Oh, what about the riots with George Floyd? Their terms, not ours. Then Antifa in Portland, she threw everything out there. And I was like, yes. And the only people who were murdered by the far right.
Yep.
You know, Charlottesburg, whatever. You know, the problem is, I think, though, is this, even though these arguments aren't working on us, they're working in spaces. And to go back to Akela's piece covering this video, it's spilling over even to folks that in New York, you know, the guy who's part of the Democratic Party organizing, who went there. I don't know what happened, how he was radicalized, or the Democrat in West Virginia, which seems a little bit, you know, more of a, there's some reason and understanding as to how that could have happened. But I do feel like it's happening more and more, even though these arguments are not very logical. Okay, like you're covering this, like, where does this, where are we missing it? Like, where are folks being radicalized that we're not seeing?
Well, one of the points that they go into in a lot more depth in the video, but that I think we tried to highlight in the piece, because I think it's sort of at the core here, is that this is like sort of specific to West Virginia, but you can apply it to other states where you know, media outlets have been sort of ravished by private equity firms, and so you're left with sort of a vacuum. And also this, in particularly in West Virginia, this phenomenon sort of coinciding with the disintegration of labor unions that sort of used to be a tether for people in the working class to the Democratic Party. And so with that sort of vacuum, in addition to, you know, there's sort of louder, you know, bullhorns coming from conservative media that get people's attention and sort of replace that method of communication. And so that's sort of something that Sam Workman, who's a professor at Morgantown, goes into about this. But I mean, I think, you know, if you're talking about people in other places where this is happening, not necessarily in West Virginia, there's a similar theme as far as people not finding the information that they want to get in, you know, in traditional outlets, and turning to sort of more radical or more right-wing sources without necessarily realizing that that's what's happening. You know, maybe because they're talking about issues that they're not hearing from the Democratic Party, or they're talking about issues that they're not hearing in mainstream media that resonate with them. And so then they're pulled in another direction. And, you know, there's a lot of more nuance there. That's not how it happens with everyone, but I think that's one theme, at least, that tries to that they try to surface in this video, that I think explains it for some cases.
I mean, we're seeing this in our media space. You know, you work for the Intercept, which is, of course, not funded by these like venture capitalists or whatever private equity firms that are
still a billionaire, though. You know, we
still a billionaire. That's the way it used to be, though. You know, the New York Times used to be solely funded by. Let's be real, that's not a new thing, a new phenomenon.
Yeah.
But with that being said, in our spaces, you know, while we own our, Lauren included, we have our own shows and we run them. We are beholden to these big companies that are, you know, even though the pressure is now on them a little bit more, especially this week on Capitol Hill, they're still not even, we're screaming. We're like, hey, the algorithm is overwhelmingly geared to the right wing. And for folks on the left, you've seen a definitely an adjustment into how to get clicks and maybe even leaning a little bit more right, because, you know, they're making a living. They want to be famous, whatever their goal is when they're hosting these shows. But you're seeing the radicalization of even folks on the left who are anti-establishment, which is part of this pipeline, I believe, part of this pipeline, which goes back to your original point, Akela, that like this space is, this anti-corporate space has existed in the left for a while, but it's now being weaponized, I believe. I mean, Lauren, does this make sense? Is this resonating?
It does, because I see a lot of like the anti-vaccine stuff on the left and saying like, don't get the vaccine because then Pfizer and Moderna get money. And it's like, Okay, but let's all protect ourselves and stop this virus, and then nationalize big pharma. Like those things, you don't need to just kill yourself.
Right.
So I see a lot of that, and also I was really surprised to see some support of Kyle Rittenhouse on the left, but I'm convinced that some of these groups on the left are in their own ballpark. It even pains me to say left in a way.
Exactly. Well, it's not a new strategy. I mean, the
Yeah.
question is where it's coming from and who's being influenced and who's actually part of the influencing, I guess. Speaking of the left, and I say left very loosely, Kirsten Sinema is supposedly a Democrat. She is really, she's something. Capitol Hill right now BBB is basically dead. Voting rights. A few weeks ago, you may recall have been read that the major donors in the Democratic Party said they are no longer going to give money to the DNC or the DTRIP or DSCC at all until they prioritize voting rights. And as a result, this has, the pressure has amped up, and leaders across the country, Democratic establishment leaders, are doing all they can to pressure voting rights and, of course, ending the filibuster. Kirsten Sinema. Do we have that video of Kirsten Sinema just being so courageous on the floor? Let's play that.
These bills help treat the symptoms of the disease, but they do not fully address the disease itself. And while I continue to support these bills, I will not support separate actions that worsen the underlying disease of division infecting our country. The debate over the Senate's 60-vote threshold shines a light on our broader challenges. There's no need for me to restate my long-standing support for the 60-vote threshold to pass legislation. And there's no need for me to restate its role protecting our country from wild reversals in federal policy.
Okay, this has made the rounds. She's like on the verge of tears?
I think she sounds nervous.
Oh, is that what it is?
I was thinking, I was like, you sound nervous to be standing up there and talking such bullshit. So I think that's what's actually happening there.
Maybe. I don't know.
Her conscience peeking out.
Is that really a thing? Okay, well, like, it really, oh God, I mean, what's next? Like, we're going to get to maybe her ultimate strategy here, but people are really angry, as they should be. I mean, this is beyond just the progressives anymore. This isn't Arizona progressives. This isn't just immigrant groups. It's like, basically, if you've ever stood for the Democratic Party in any way, like, you seem to be angry at Kirsten Sinema. Is this going to last? Has she responded? Is she losing staff? Like, what's happening in her universe? How can this continue?
I mean, I don't think that it's going to change necessarily. I mean, she doesn't really have any reason to change her stance. I think, like, based on how she's behaved with BBB and other stuff. I mean, she's been very clear from the beginning that she's never going to support filibuster reform. There's no, I don't know that the party even really has any leverage over her at this point, because there's sort of like this phenomenon with Manchin and Sinema now that, they're getting so much attention because of the stances that they're taking on certain things, and the donors that they are sort of appeasing are kept happy. And so that's sort of that's the pressure that, if they're under any pressure, that's the pressure that they're under. But yeah, I mean, Democrats have sort of pretty much resigned themselves to the fact that this isn't going to pass. So that, I think the real question is, like, how is that going to impact voters during midterms? Like, I don't think it's a question of whether the Congress is actually going to do this, because it's already watered down. So if they even pass what they've agreed to at this point, it's not going to do a whole lot. And so some groups that I've talked to have been talking about how, the news about the donors withdrawing or, threatening to withhold funds has been going around for a couple of months, but some voter groups have also been encouraging people to give to smaller sort of local efforts, because they know that even if this does pass, like, they still need to combat sort of, the dark money efforts to like push voter suppression bills at the state level, and address things that wouldn't necessarily be touched by a federal bill. So I feel like that's sort of where the conversation is right now, and should be, because, Sinema has a lot of power, but at the end of the day, like, the rest of the party has already conceded so much on the greater bill that I think there needs to be some scrutiny of that too.
What I don't understand though is it's for progressives who think, well, this is just like a game, and centrist Democrats, they're there to represent corporations. Well, there's a lot of truth to that. I fundamentally, personally don't believe that Senator Schumer wants to give up his power. He has a tremendous amount of power. And at the end of the day, the buck stops with those who want to keep their power, whether it's Joe Biden or Senator Schumer. They don't want to be in and out. And she is essentially blocking what could potentially keep that power. Not passing BBB, not passing filibuster reform, but specifically BBB, that is a tool for folks to stay in office. And I can imagine her colleagues who are in districts where they're on the fence, like they may not win re-election, must be extremely angry at her, because now they're at risk of losing their power. And even if they are corporate Democrats, they're at risk of losing their power. So there's got to be something, though. I mean, with Manchin, we always talk about maybe some sort of investigation being held over him. But, in the old days, anybody who's watched House of Cards knows that there's the leaders have a book of dirty stuff on these people, and they use it when they don't fall in line. Why ain't that happening, Lauren?
I don't know. I mean, I'm originally from West Virginia, so Manchin is very painful for me in particular, because my family's still in West Virginia, and I just see them get cheated by their politicians all the time. Manchin's part of a dynasty. His daughter is profiting off of, pharmaceutical companies, and we're just kind of the victims of this family that won't seem to go away. So I don't know. I mean, I supported Paula Jean when she ran. I think the sad thing is, like, West Virginia, and I'm sure, Akela, you can speak much more eloquently to this, but there's so many ways in which West Virginians are kept from the facts, kept from being able to think about anything else other than just getting some sort of meal on their table. And they're just in survival mode. And so whenever it comes to voting day, there's a vote for the name they recognize, which is Joe Manchin. And they're just victims of this terrible political process. I don't know how to get this guy out of power. I think investigating him is good.
What confuses me, though, is, okay, so clearly these are two lawmakers who are not potentially not concerned with re-election, or they just know that they're going to get reelected, or I don't know about Sinema's case, but that's not what they're responding to, Akela. Like, is there any sense that the Democrats in leadership are pulling out their toolkit and trying anything other than giving up?
I mean, it seems like there's still sort of, closed door meetings happening, which is, not necessarily news. I mean, that's just how these things go. I'm sure they're still having conversations, but, I do think I would love to read a story about sort of if there's any like substantive tension brewing between Schumer and Sinema at this point. But I think, I don't know. I mean, there was a call. This is sort of on the House side, but like there was a call the other day with the CPC and like the Tri-Caucus like consortium, and they basically were asked, what is the point of doing this if it's not going to pass? And Pramila Jayapal said that Republicans haven't been forced to explain why they would take this sort of position on voting rights now. And so I don't know if that's sort of, if they're banking on that, like that's obviously just coming from the House side, but I don't know if there's any sort of connection to that. If there's sort of any like reality to that being part of what they want to happen by, forcing Sinema to come out and like, make the case for why she doesn't want to be supporting this right now and hoping that will backfire. I feel like that's not necessarily like a smart move, but I don't know. I would be speculating, like if I said, they're definitely gonna, pull out the dirt on her. But I think, there's sort of like a sense, I think, at least in recent months that, rather than sort of coming in with a blunt hammer. Like they think that they can either negotiate their way out of it, or, you know, that eventually the villain will fall on their face. And, you know, unfortunately they keep being proven wrong on both of those points. Yeah.
So there's getting into the mindset of these folks and what's going to move them has been a big part of this last, you know, year or so, of their threats and their temper tantrums. But Amy Siskind, who she's an author and she's an activist, and she used to be a Republican, and she's a Democrat now, and she's angry at Kirsten Sinema. She tweeted something out yesterday, I believe. And this is the last part, but we're going to go back up to the beginning because I think this is really important to read the whole thing. Let's do the last part real quick. Let me just read the last. I want to start with the end and then go back up. Sorry, guys. Okay, so she has a friend who she'll talk about in a second, believes that Sinema believes MAGA elected officials reject partisanship when they are given a chance of her over Trump. Yes, the land of magical thinking. But here we are, folks. Now let's scroll back up to the beginning so we can tell the story, because it's about the mindset of Sinema. What's actually going on here? Okay. This is a thread on Sinema. Sinema's behavior has made no common sense to me. Surely she knows, too, that she would lose in the 2024 Democratic primary. Why would she do it? I have info from an inside source who lives in Arizona and has a direct connection. With his permission, I am sharing. Okay. Let's do this. Can you zoom in a little bit? Yeah, thank you. First, and this likely isn't breaking news to anyone, Sinema has a highly overinflated ego. She believes since she's been able to work her way up and accumulate so many academic degrees in a short time, she is a true superstar, head and shoulders above intellectually. To Sinema, as many of us suspected, her term in the U.S. Senate, she believes, is just a stopping ground for her next step. She doesn't assume she will need to be reelected. This is something I imagined, but I assumed she would be a consultant or something of that variety. And I've always felt, just throwing that in there, that, you know, you don't have to be a senator to be a consultant. That's not, you don't have to go through all this to get that. But nope, I was wrong. This isn't what Sinema believes will be her next step. With her inflated ego and small circle of friends, many of whom she has alienated and lost, not pushing back, she has been living in an echo chamber. The big money corporate donors are happy to feed this. There's just a couple more tweets. Sinema believes she will be running for president in 2024, I am told. This self-styled bipartisanship she believes she speaks for will be her brand to run as the candidate in the middle, not far left or far right. She has convinced herself this is her calling, and she has it. And then the last one is, and you can see why having alienated so many close to her and believing she's smarter than everyone else in DC and beyond, and with the corporate donors feeding this too, while she toes the line, this misguided fantasy can be her view. This, I am told, is what's happening. Now, granted, this is rumor and speculation, but I want to talk about this theory because that could be a path. I mean, we've seen crazier things happen. That seems to be very much like a no labels approach. Maybe not officially, but you know, they're center ground. What do you do with that? I mean, Lauren, is there? Where do you go from there?
I actually, that was an interesting thread to read through, because I used to think that she wanted to be like a lobbyist or something afterwards, but it didn't quite make sense because she could have just done that, like you said. My brain never took me to her running for president ever because everyone hates her, but you know, ego is blinding, so I really don't know. I'm speechless. If she runs for president, that will be the funniest thing I've ever heard.
Well, I think what's interesting is you know, that would, I assume, be in a Democratic primary, a crowded Democratic primary. I mean, head to head with Joe Biden, she's not going to win, but in a crowded primary, maybe that's her pathway. Kayla, have you heard other people make these remarks, or is this new?
I mean, I think sort of people's minds usually, when you see sort of like a character like Sinema, your mind kind of goes to, yeah, like they probably want to run for president at some point. But I think it is also kind of common knowledge that like all she cares about is what her donors are saying, and like that they're sort of, you know, they're sort of a a self-perpetuating cycle there as far as like molding her positions. But yeah, I mean, I think, it's interesting that the sort of logic that they take as far as like she doesn't care about being reelected in 2024 is that she wants to run for president because why would, if what you're doing now wouldn't get you reelected statewide, why would it get you elected nationally? So the alternative point or like what I've heard people think is like, people are not going to, by the time it's time for her to be up for reelection, that people will have forgotten about this and moved on to something else. And she might, pivot a little bit more, which honestly is believable to me because people have sort of like a short memory and, we're going to be onto something completely different at that point in time. So I actually don't know that I don't know that what she's doing right now will hurt her reelection chances so much, but if other groups don't necessarily capitalize on reminding people, that this is who she is. But, I can't predict the future, but that's sort of what my read on it is.
And that's a big bet. I mean, the truth is we're still fighting fights from like 6 years ago. On one hand, yes, people forget very quickly, but people are angry, and that's only 2 years away, which really means it's only 1 year away until that election. It's the presidential election is coming up next year. November, by mid-November, we're going to be talking about the presidential election, just so everybody knows. And that means we're going to be talking about her election. So
I don't know how anyone would forget like this little ditty.
That just for our podcast listeners, that's a thumbs down. That's the curtsy thumbs down move.
Yeah. I mean, Trump was elected.
That's true, but he plays a different electoral game. He's got an infrastructure there built by the Koch brothers and electoral commissions, and they've got folks everywhere and justices. She may not even have her own Democratic Party in her own state, which says a lot. Like, I think it's fascinating to see her own Democrats locally turn on her. This isn't just like activists anymore. This is like actual party people who have turned on her. I've be curious to see. Maybe she'll run as a Republican. She and Tulsi Gabbard in the Republican primary.
I recently as in a couple years ago, but saw To Kill a Mockingbird on Broadway, and the children are played by adults. And they do it really well because they get the movements of children down to a T. And that's the kind of vibe I get when I watch her, because just the way she carries herself is like she's some teenager that is just really excited to be in the middle of a floor. I don't understand. I don't know where she's going with her life, but she seems to have some kind of a drive.
Don't you guys love that we're all just so beholden to a couple of narcissists?
Yes.
That's it. Oh. Anytime you think you're doing you just a little bit too much, just think about Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, because this is their world and we're just part of it. On that note, thanks for being part of our world. I really appreciate you, Lauren Ashcraft and Akela Lacey, for your work, joining us on Femme Friday, and everybody tuning in. As always, we appreciate you and stay in solidarity. We will see you on Tuesday for TNS Live on YouTube and Rockfin.
The No Miki Show. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The No Miki Show.